I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, I think, one of the smartest people on the planet, certainly one of the smartest people that comes on USAWatchdog.com. It's Catherine Austin Fitts of the Solari Report. Solari.com is the website. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be with you. There's so much to talk about.
There's a lot. You have your second quarter report out, and as I said in the last time, it's very detailed. It's a lot to it. There's video. There's all kinds of sources and links. It's a very smart report. I mean, I can boil it down to we need infrastructure, and we're going to have a time financing infrastructure because the bonds that we used to do, municipal and federal and all those kind of bonds, we're going to be in an interest rate cycle up. However, that said, we still need the infrastructure. But I want to read something that you put in this report. It's a little long, but I want to read it because you condense this thing really well. I'm going to put my glasses on and you say, you just completed the transfer of $40 trillion to your team. Some would say stole through global financial coup d'etat, which you've talked about several times. Your leadership pulled this off due to financial engineering, speculation, and fraud. They lied, they killed, they covered up, they lobbied to get some laws passed and others canceled. They engaged in racketeering in emerging markets to lock up natural resources. They privatized companies and assets on the cheap. They raised hundreds of billions of dollars in not-for-profits and foundations in order to engineer a soft revolution for global control. This money was then invested via their endowments in large corporations, while grants were spreading vaccines, GMO seeds, and photo opportunities wherever they went. These are the people that have control of our economy. And what strikes me about them and is, wow, these are some evil people, and I can't believe that they're going to make us a beautiful world. How are we going to navigate what's coming down the pipe if these weasels are in control of $40 trillion of our money they stole?
Well, it's an even bigger question because if you're Mr. Global, the team you use to do this is not the team that can get you a positive return. Now that you've got the $40 trillion, you need to reinvest the $40 trillion. You need the $40 trillion to produce a positive yield. This is not the team that can do that. Do you see what I mean? So
the team that can do that has handed us things like, Greece, and the onerous terms of this deal, which even the IMF says, hey, they need a debt cut. I mean, what?
Well, here's the thing. Greece essentially looks to me like disaster capitalism. So you're trying to get another positive return by liquidation. But the reality is if you liquidate the global economy, you're not going to get a positive return. I mean, the game can go on for a while. But the reason I said that Puerto Rico and Greece rang the bell is what you're seeing is this game is getting very old. And what we see coming back, and it's the IMF is the beginning of it, is saying, look, this is not sustainable. This debt is not sustainable. And let me tell you why that's important, Greg. When you and I lend to a place in a way that's predatory, we reduce the ability of that place to pay back the debt it could. So it's a lose-lose situation. Now, if you skim off the top as a predator, you get a kick. But the reality is the longer you play that game, the more game you play it with, you can't produce the returns on the amount of money they've stolen. In other words, what I'm saying is it's a spiral down, and it's not even going to work for Mr. Global.
So the IMF realizes what you realize,
right.
And this is a very unique take. This is why I say you are one of the smartest people on the planet. Is that you've just boiled down to what is actually going on and why the IMF is saying they need a debt cut. And they need a debt cut because they know this is a dead horse they're beating on. Is that right?
Well, but here's the thing, because Greece is not a dead horse. Greece is a country full of talented, gifted people who can
That's it. I'm just saying that
what the IMF is saying is if you want this debt paid back, we can get more debt paid back with a sustainable plan than we can get with an unsustainable plan. Now, if you just want to asset strip, then that's a different story. But what is beginning to happen is the feedback loop is coming back around. It's coming in from the BRICS nations. It's coming in from the Greek people. And what they're saying is, we need an economy that produces wealth if we're going to get anything done, whether it's get kids working again or get debt paid back. So there's a rational voice that's coming back through. It's a human voice that's saying inhuman plans ultimately will depopulate or bring war, but they're not the change we need. And you and I, let me bring this back to what we've talked about in the last 3 shows we've done together. The central banking warfare model is wearing thin. And at the highest portfolio level, there are 3 things you can do. You can have war, you can have depopulation, or you can have change. And the voice you're hearing coming back from the BRICS, the voice you're hearing coming back from the Greek people is, let's try change. And the IMF is basically saying in a very tentative, early way, they have a point.
Well, because otherwise, if we don't have change, what we get are Molotov cocktails thrown at cops in Greece. I mean, that is the real world result if we stay on this path. Is that what you're saying?
Let me explain what a Molotov cocktail is. If a group of people go protesting and throwing Molotov cocktails and the government has to pay people to go manage them, that's a whole bunch of time and money spent on doing something that doesn't build new ships that makes Greek shipping stronger. Do you see what I mean? Are we going to spend our time fighting, or are we going to spend our time creating and building? And that's the conundrum and the voice you're hearing. And, I give Lagarde a lot of credit for coming back the way she did. She's been criticized for not doing it much faster and not doing it much stronger. But at least it's beginning to ring that bell that Puerto Rico and Greece have rung, which is, we've got to create value in the fundamental economy, or else, you can't eat it if you don't grow it. And we can't grow it if we're all engaged in disaster capitalism.
And my point with the Molotov cocktails, I mean, people are they're resisting. They're likely they're going to throw out all those politicians in Greece that voted for this. I mean, and Lagarde is out over and over again saying, you got to cut their debt. It's unsustainable. You have to cut it, which means all these other countries have to have their debt cut, right? I mean, Spain, Italy, even France.
Here's what the people in Greece are saying. In every society, Greg, you have very high performance people. You're one of them. So I call them the net energy plus people. And they know how to get things done. They know how to get the trains on time. They know how to get the buses out on time. They know how to open a restaurant. They know how to, they get things done. Another expression I use is the people on the line. They're the line managers. They're the people who make things go. And what they know is that the way this is being organized and engineered by all the different politicians is it's destroying the economy. It's not building it. Now, if the goal is depopulation, then maybe that works as a operational plan, which, and then there's an even bigger objection. But if the goal is to get something that makes sense in terms of physical reality, what is going on is not sane. And that's what the Greek people are saying. Not that this is what they're saying is that this is not functional on the ground.
And that's what Lagarde is saying. She's saying that this isn't going to work, and period, the end. And are we getting... Go ahead.
This is financially, what can I say? This has a negative return on investment. In other words, you're in a situation where you can get a positive return on investment and you can get something positive accomplished. Why do something that has a negative return on investment? All you do is do what you did in Russia in the 90s, which is turn the country over to the mafia. I'm sure there's a Greek mafia, and you strip the place, and everybody gets to buy assets, at 10 cents on the dollar. I've told you the story of being Assistant Secretary of Housing in '89 and being in the cash room at Treasury and realizing, oh my God, they want these assets to go off lower, not higher, because then their friends can buy them cheap. That game is over, and the voice you're hearing coming back from the BRICS and from Asia and across the Silk Road is, we would rather build high-speed trains than engage in disaster capitalism. We're tired of it. It won't work.
They want to build something instead of trying to bankrupt people and get their assets on the cheap, and that's what you're saying. That the plan so far has been to bankrupt people and divvy up the assets on the cheap, and that's what the Germans did with this big, $50-something billion fund. They want to cut up their assets. I mean, that's what they're doing, right?
Right, and if you're a politician, you're trying to build a constituency across a very complex sort of political and economic structure. And traditionally, the way you do that is you say, okay, if we accomplish this vision, what everybody, that we're trying to accomplish, everybody gets a piece. And unfortunately, that's turned into, this going in and whacking up the assets for all your friends. It's fees for your friends. And I guess what I'm saying and what the world is saying, and even what Lagarde is saying, is, that game has run its course, and we need to shift.
Is America going to get a big dollar devaluation? I mean, isn't that going to be in the cards that the U.S. is going to get? This currency is going to be devalued, and some people are looking like this fall that we could have a big disruption. What say you?
It's a military question. It's a military question. If you go back and look at the last 2 weeks, the U.S. establishment went to war and won big. They're all licking their chops now. I don't know. If you take a look at the Iran deal, you've got $100 to $150 billion of assets that are unfreezing. You've got, trade with Iran, all the guys lining up to do trade with Iran. You've got lower oil prices, which is going to help the economy a little bit because it's soft. On and on and on. And what you watched was, the VIX did a meltdown, and that's because the establishment won big. And they're sitting there. The tapeworm's engorged for another round. So how did they do that, Greg? And what I have to tell you, I believe ultimately it's a military question. On the covert side, what is their weaponry, and how do they engineer these things? How do they pull it off? So I told you, if they raise interest rates, if Yellen really does this fall, you could see the dollar continue to rise. I mean, the dollar's up significantly in the last 2 weeks. But you could see the dollar rise. We saw it was up 12% last year. It hit 100 this year. You were right. You said they're not going to let it go too high because it's going to slam.
I should have bet $1.
You should have bet $1 because you were right. They ceilinged it.
No, you freaked me out though. You crushed me. Go ahead.
They ceilinged it because I think it is tough on corporate profits, and that's why I think this Iran deal is very interesting. How it's going to translate into corporate profits, because that's the conundrum. Anyway, but I think we are coming into a change because we've been kicking the can and playing the disaster capitalism game. And what I was trying to say in the report was there's a realignment happening between the kids in Greece and Mr. Global, because the kids in Greece and Mr. Global both need a positive return. And disaster capitalism is not going to go the course.
This Iran deal, which is not a done deal in Congress, incidentally,
right?
Also the Saudis, the Egyptians. None of them like this. The Israelis. I don't think this is going to put off war. I think it's going to speed up war. What do you say about that?
I don't know, because I think there's a lot of information that has to come out. I think it will, the administration's going to go to the UN first, and from a political standpoint, I understand why they're going to do it. I think they're going to be able to move it through Congress. And one of the reasons is, if you back to the U.S. establishment, a year ago, the U.S. establishment was way overextended. I mean, we were really seriously overextended. And I think what Kerry's been doing and his group is running around and sort of shutting risk doors. That's what Cuba was. That's what Iran is. And I think they need those doors shut. Now, it's a big slap in the face to Israel, but no one deserves that slap better and bigger than Israel.
Well, why is that? Why do they deserve a big slap? Iran is constantly firing rockets into, with their proxies and Hezbollah and Hamas. They're conducting a war against Israel. How long do you let that go on? And a lot of people just ignore that fact, that they are in a state of proxy war with Israel.
Right.
Who would let that go on like it's going on?
I want to talk about Israel having nuclear weapons.
Of course, they have nuclear weapons. Yes, they wouldn't be there if they didn't.
Right. And their, Israel's approach to diplomacy is why everybody around them is afraid. So, there's two sides to this story, and the reality is U.S. foreign policy should be run by U.S. and the Anglo-American Alliance's national security interests, not Israel.
Well, I understand that, but, the Saudis and the Egyptians just teamed up with the Israelis, so that's how freaked out they are about this.
Remember,
they are our allies, and if Saudi Arabia wakes up one day and says, you know what, I think we're going to sell oil in yuan, in ruble, and euro. I don't think we're going to sell oil exclusively in dollars. Right. The dollar takes a header off a cliff.
Right. Well, the dollar there's no doubt, the dollar's run up a lot, and I think the long-term trajectory, in many scenarios on the dollar is way down. And the reality is, if you look at where we're going, and that's what I think it's important to look at, I think what Mr. Global wants, who's, and I don't think Mr. Global is American, I think what Mr. Global wants is a global digital currency. And so all of these currencies are headed into an evolution, and that's the question, what's that going to look like? And I don't think it's going to look, 5 years from now, we won't be talking about the falling U.S. dollar. We'll be talking about something else.
Well, unless we break out into total, Armageddon war. I mean, what this deal has set up is to legitimize Iran to attack Israel. That's not going to stand. That's just not going to work out. And anybody's dreamscape that's going to work out.
I just don't believe this. This is a deal.
No. Yeah, I don't care what you believe. This is a fact. They fund Hamas and they fund Hezbollah. This is a fact. They fire rockets into Israel. And when you hear, they're just 100-pound rockets with a 100-mile payload.
But the fighting on this is a two-way street.
Of course it is, but the only street that we hear about is how terrible Israel is. And I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you.
Oh, no.
Do what?
That's not the news I read.
Well, it's not the news I read. I mean, there is a two-way street, you are correct. And why in the world in this deal that they say, hey, we're going to give you $100 billion, you can't be funding Hamas and Hezbollah to constantly attack Israel like you've done for the last 3 decades?
Wait a minute. Because I don't want to hang on the Iran deal, but what they're saying is...
I want to stay on the Iran deal.
Wait, don't interrupt.
Okay.
Don't interrupt. We're unfreezing $100 billion. What you don't know is what were the deals behind the scenes on what companies get what deals and who gets that $100 billion. Okay. They're unfreezing it, but they unfreezed it with an agreement as to where exactly it might go. And we don't know what that deal is, and that's the deal I want to know.
We just made a deal.
Which G7 companies?
We just made a deal with the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, according to the Obama administration State Department. That is an ugly, visible fact.
No. Wait a minute. The United States, Britain, Russia, France, Germany, and I forget who the other country, Canada, made that deal.
With the #1 state sponsor of terrorism.
Well,
that's a fact that nobody wants to kind of ugly fact, but that's a fact.
I don't think that is a fact.
It is a fact. Go to the State Department website.
The State Department says it, but I don't think it is a reality.
All I have to do is to take a look at what the stated policy of the U.S. State Department.
I'm not going to go here because I'm not going to go here.
There's a lot of sin to go around in the Middle East, Catherine.
I have to tell you, I think Kerry did the right thing, and I think the G7 did the right thing. This has to de-escalate. This whole situation needs to de-escalate.
Well, that's where we differ. I think it's just escalated because I think that in order for the Saudi Arabians to team up with the Israelis, they're freaked out. And this is not a de-escalation. This is an escalation.
But let's look at what the Saudis are...
A lot of people are going to make some nice money doing it, but it's going to escalate.
The Saudis are freaked out by a falling oil price. The Saudis just issued $4 billion of bonds. And fracking technology, changes in technology, changes in what's going on in the world, and us playing the oil card with Russia is bringing the oil down, and it's really hurting the Saudis. But it's much bigger than just this deal. Because this deal is just one of many things bringing the oil price down, and the Saudis are going to go through a gut-wrenching change. And they're scared, yes, absolutely.
And if I were the Saudis, and I was just freaked out, that's a wild card.
This is bringing another $20 billion a year onto the market of oil revenues. So, and that pushes the price down.
I do understand that, and that actually Russia kind of cut its own throat there with bringing more oil on the market. But
right, and so
this is a complicated system, but there's two sides of the story. And
right, but here's the question: Obama came out and said Putin was unbelievably helpful and supportive in getting this down, and complimented Putin right in the middle of this. Now, remember. Let's go back to World War II. Who was it who invaded Iran? It was the Soviets and the Brits together, along with Commonwealth forces. So there's a very deep old history between the Brits, the Russians, and the American on Iran. And that's why I'm saying you have to look, what are the backdoor deals? Where are those frozen assets going to be spent with what G7 countries? And if you look at all the old investors and trading partners in Iran's what are the deal about who's going to be trading with Iran going forward? So,
well, let me tell you what is unhelpful in this deal and why this wasn't part of the deal. It should have been, because they went for the money and they didn't go for anything else. And that's why I think it's got a lot of cracks in it. The Revolutionary Guard reported last week in USA Today, their main goal is to wipe Israel off the map. Have you read the Bible? Have you read what God says about this? Israel's not going to be wiped off the map.
I've read the Bible, but I have to tell you, as a Christian, the thing that has most deeply offended me is watching the Bible used to manipulate Middle East politics. So I'm not going to take part in doing that. I just think that's inappropriate.
I think this deal is a bad deal. If you're a banker and you're a financier, it's a great deal. If you're watching geopolitical and you're watching the winds of war, this is a terrible deal because it did not settle things down in the Middle East. It's a fantasy. That's a fantasy of bankers.
I think this is a messy deal. But I think that the United States and the world has bankrupted itself on Middle Eastern wars, and we have to de-escalate because we're out of money and we're out of time. So it's a messy deal, it's an imperfect deal, but there needs to be a de-escalation. And the reality is we don't have the money and we don't have the capacity to go in and physically occupy on a totalitarian basis the entire Middle East. There's not enough money on the planet to do it unless you're prepared to use biowarfare and just depopulate everybody.
And this is where we disagree. This is where we disagree, and I hate to disagree with you, but you say it's de-escalation, and I say it's escalation. It is escalation. Watch. I'll bet you $1. I'll bet you $1 this escalates.
It might.
Yeah. It might. It will.
Right.
It will.
Sometimes you can't give bullies what they want. And unfortunately, we've got bullies everywhere, and it's not.
But listen, to gloss over the fact. Listen, Catherine, I gotta gloss over the fact that Iran pays to attack Israel by proxy and pretend that's not happening and that's not an issue is a fool's errand. That should have been part of the deal. It was not part of the deal.
I never said that. But if you look at who finances state-sponsored terrorism in this world and how much and who does it, they are way down on the list, Greg. So
Iran is, listen, all I have is the overt facts. We just made a deal with the #1 sponsor of state terrorism. That's what we just did.
You and I pay taxes every year to one of the greatest sponsors of state-sponsored terrorism. You finance it, your tax dollar.
I understand. Yes, I understand we give money to Israel. Yes, and there's two sides to that story. And what I hear constantly from the people that bash Israel is only one side.
America has been financing state-sponsored terrorism for decades.
Oh my God, we just sponsored $500 million to train. Who are we training over there in Syria? The rebels, the so-called rebels, which is ISIS and Al Qaeda. And we got 60 recruits.
If you look at the most violent, interests in the Middle East, and you see the evolution of where they came from vis-a-vis different occupations and things we've done or the Russians have done, the more we invest in these kinds of activities, the more we create people who behave this way. And it's not so simple that it's just nation states. So, part of what I was trying to do in the second quarter report is say, look, we can spend money on negative activities. We can spend money on things that hurt and kill, whether we're doing it in the Middle East or we're doing it here. And the reality is we have to get out of creating an entire military-industrial complex, which is, whether it's Iran's or ours, that makes money from sponsoring terrorism, and get into doing things that are economically productive and generate enough value to pay back the goddamn debt. Because all of the state-sponsored terrorism, as far as I'm concerned, is being financed, directly or indirectly by more debt. Well, and it's destroying the economic activities that make it impossible for us to pay back more debt. So I'm a banker. I'm one of those evil banker people. And as a banker, what I have to tell you is we cannot afford the level of violence on this planet. Now, I understand, that in one sense the Iran deal tries to stop certain violences. It inspires more violence from the people who are unhappy. I understand that. But the reality is the U.S. is not what it was 20 years ago. We're moving into a much more, We don't have a simple Bretton Woods system where the U.S. can command security globally. We're talking about a world where there's much more, the nature of the weaponry and the nature of the war is much more multipolar. And the question is, we can't do everything. We can't be everyone. We can't make it all work. And we're going to have to find another way to evolve the central banking warfare model other than the U.S. making everybody sit down and behave, because it's not going to work. And given our history of encouraging bad behavior, we don't have a really good brand on this. That's what the Brits are trying to say. If you look at one of the most positive voices on the planet right now, it's the Brits. Because the Brits are prepared on the G7 side, like Lagarde, to talk about, okay, what do we need to really make things work?
Not more debt and not more war. But one of my guests, Greg Manarino, said, and I think he's right about this. I think we've reached peak debt. We can't get any more debt, which I think when you take a look at the Greek deal, just look at that little microcosm, and that is the cradle of democracy, which the bankers want control. They want control. And they want assets, real assets, not bonds. And my question is what they're going after are real assets, and they're going to gorge themselves.
The bankers are not in control. Think of the bankers as a vacuum cleaner or a bureaucracy that serves the people who are in control. They're, if you look at all the bankers being killed around the world, that's proof positive that the bankers aren't in control. So
who's killing the bankers?
Well, that's the question.
Governments?
My guess is a lot of those deaths are what I call knowledge management. So you blow up the World Trade Center and you destroy all the files at the SEC and the FBI related to the financial fraud. Or you blow up Oklahoma City and you blow up all the HUD files of the financial fraud in Region 6 where, all that stuff was going on.
Oh, you just enlightened us on something with Oklahoma City.
Right, it's knowledge management. So actually it was the HUD Iran-Contra files and all the financial fraud for Iran-Contra going out of HUD is what I believe. So it's a kind of knowledge management. What you're doing is you're tying down situations where you've got legal liability, and that's why people are getting killed. Now, was it the bank security force that was having them killed? Was it the intelligence agencies? I think it's all murky. I think each situation is different. But what it shows is you're going through a transition from a period where you had the financial coup. Now you're trying to tie down the liabilities and go on to the next phase. But the bankers are not in control, and that's why I keep coming back to this question of who's in control. Because, Greg, if you look at thousands and thousands and thousands of situations and examples that I've experienced working on Wall Street, working as a regulator in the U.S. government, working as the publisher of the Solari Report, trying to figure out how the markets are working, what I keep coming back to is there is a dividend that is disappearing from the economy. It's like a tithe. The bankers are managing the whole economy to produce a tithe, and that tithe is disappearing somewhere. Now, some of it is going to black budget, kind of invisible weaponry, but I think it's more than that. And the question comes back as a governance situation. Why are they desperate to get that tithe, and where is that money going? It's like a huge drain on the global economy, and the bankers are trying to, put a stage face on it, but the reality is money keeps disappearing, and everybody, what kids in Greece and kids in America and kids in Ferguson and kids in Baltimore are asking is, why are you running this in such a crazy way, and where is the money disappearing to? And I've got the same question, and it's a big question mark. I don't know.
One last question about the bonds. Do you think we have a bond calamity? I mean, if they start cutting this debt like Lagarde wants to do, the bonds are going to be worth less. As you know, a banker, they took the bonds and they leveraged them 30, 40, 50 times. And then on top of that, we put on derivatives, according to the Bank of International Settlements, a quadrillion. It's 1,000 trillion, as you know. Could they crash the bond market by cutting this debt? Could they crash it?
It depends on how you do it. In theory, yes, anything's possible. The big issue is you've been printing money and you've been piling money up in the bond market and not letting it into the real economy because you get huge asset bubbles. And you think the asset bubbles are bad now. What do you see when that money comes across? And the question is, how do you bring that money into the real economy and do it in a way which is productive for the real economy, which is why I keep getting back to this point. this money is going to have to leave the bond market. It's going to have to go into real estate. It's going to have to go into equities. It's going to have to build infrastructure. It's going to have to do all these things. It can't work, and we're going to have a mess unless you have a vision and the leadership to bring it out in a way that can be productive, which is all possible. You know, it is possible to bring this money out and do things in a way that we end up with a better situation and an economically productive situation. And that's why I keep asking this question, and I asked about the infrastructure. But if you look at the current leadership, particularly in the United States, you know, that's not the leadership you need to do that. And I had that great quote in from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Colin Powell's chief of staff, and he's talking about the infrastructure we need for the Navy. If you want the Navy to, you know, if you want America to be a good cop globally, it's got to have a good Navy. And if you're letting the Navy collapse, well, then I assure you, the Navy collapses, the U.S. dollar will collapse. That's 100% guarantee.
So under the management we have now, instead of having this nirvana that you think we could have, and not nirvana, I shouldn't say that, you know, a good outcome that you think we could have, you need good management. We have terrible management. So likewise, we could have a financial meltdown bigger than the last one.
We can have war. We can have depopulation, and we can have change. What the slow burn I keep talking about is sort of a depopulation, you know, mixed war and depopulation on a slow process. But we're coming into a period when it's got to accelerate. I want change. You know, I don't want to be depopulated. I don't want to depopulate you. I don't want to have war. You know, I don't want to fight with anybody. I'd rather change. And so the question I was asking in the second quarter report is, okay, what are some of the conditions? What do we need to do if we want change? And that's, you know, I'm trying to figure out how do you get to change. And the conundrum I have is who's really running things and why are they behaving in such a completely irrational basis? And I think part of it is nobody knows how to build a constituency or a vision for a way to get out of this that has a positive return on investment, whether it's for Mr. Global or you or me. I don't. You know, I'm not saying, believe me, I'm not saying it's going to be nirvana, and I'm not saying that Mr. Global wishes the best for you and me. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying I don't want war and I don't want to be depopulated, although a lot of people have tried.
Oh, I know. Listen, I just want people to know this. I think the world of you. I think you're very smart. I think you're an honest, good person. I wouldn't have you on and I wouldn't plug your site. And I want to thank you for coming on and having a spirited discussion. I think the world of you. I want people to know that I really like you. And I think people should subscribe to your site, Solari. Go to your site. It's Solari.com. Your report, the Solari Report. You're the mastermind of that. Very bright, very intelligent, very insightful things that you won't see anywhere else. I'm telling you, I look all over the web, and when you come out, your analysis is brilliant and cutting edge. So thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg. Always a pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Okay. I should have bet you that $1.